Welcome to this Dimicator video. Today you're going to see a number of sparring fights that were recorded at our regular Dimicator training sessions, and you will see fights in which we use no protective equipment at all but sharp swords, and you will also see fights where we wear masks and use blunt sword simulators. Now I guess a few introductory words would be in order here. Why do we use different kinds of equipment at all? This is because sparring or free play, which people usually use as a term to refer to the free application of the techniques that you learn in training against an uncooperating partner. So basically a fight simulation. So sparring is exactly this. It's not fighting, but a simulation. And this is important to understand. This is what divides a martial art from a martial sport. Because in sports, all the technique that you learn, you can apply exactly the same way you learn it in training, because this is the context they were designed for, the competition that you're going to use them in. Now, in martial arts, the techniques that you want to train, that you want to freely apply in sparring, were originally designed to kill people, to maim people, to injure people. And of course, in training, this is exactly what you will try to avoid. So you have to compromise your original martial art to make it safe to train it in the first place. And that means that you can only train one aspect or a few aspects at a time, while taking compromises someplace else and compromising other aspects of your martial art or of swordsmanship in this particular case. So in order to benefit from your training and benefit from free fencing, you have to be aware what it is that you are practicing in your particular fight simulation. In the first part of the video, you're going to see combatants using sharp swords in free play. Sharp swords like this one are weapons. They're not sports instruments. They're potentially dangerous, and there is virtually no difference to the historical arms that were used to kill and maim people in combat. So there is a high risk of getting injured if they are not used correctly, which means if they are not used with proper skill, responsibility, and in the appropriate environment. So beware of that. I bet every one of you has cut himself somewhere in his life. So this happens when you get hit by something like that. It's very dangerous. If you just browse the internet, there are hundreds of clips and photos of gruesome injuries of people who hurt themselves accidentally with swords. So you don't want this to happen in your practice. Now, what are the pros of using a sharp sword? This is apparently when blades meet. When blades meet, which we call a bind, and if you are familiar with the historical fencing treatises, you well know the expression, or a crossing of blades, and this cross provides you with a pressure signal which informs you which actions to take next. A crossing of sharp swords has a very different quality than a crossing of blunt swords, because sharp swords give you, they stick and they give you a clear pressure feedback, while blunt swords slide and also negatively influence the flow of a fight. The second big advantage of practicing with a sharp sword is that you quickly develop a danger awareness that is hard to develop when wearing protective equipment and using allegedly safe weapon simulators. This also implies that you learn your measure much better, and this again means that you learn control much better, because of course you don't want to hit your training partner either. On the flip side, because you don't want to injure your partner, you cannot carry out a number of actions. Apparently, you cannot make contact, you cannot thrust somebody in the face, you cannot cut through a limb, of course. So you have to slow down actions, you have to stop actions, and this is, in terms of practice, a negative aspect, because it means that you could create what some people refer to as artifacts. That is, you create a conditioning that you don't really want in order to carry out historical swordsmanship properly. And this, of course, is where the blunt swords come in and the masks. So this is a blunt sword, or rather a sword simulator. I say simulator because it's not actually a weapon, it's a sports instrument, it's a tool for your practice of historical swordsmanship. And in combination with a mask, it allows for actions that you cannot possibly carry out when you are using sharp swords. Like, for instance, completely finishing a thrust and stabbing somebody into the face with a mask and a blunt sword. That is possible. So to learn the precision of finishing actions, you need equipment like this, and it also means that you do not have to worry so much about the safety of your fencing partner, because you know if you hit him in the face on his mask, nothing's going to happen, you're not going to injure him. On the flip side, of course, binds that ensue with blunt swords are very slippery. It's a very slippery affair. You don't get the same pressure feedback. You can simulate the behavior of sharp swords binding. However, to this end, you first have to know how this feels, and this is a catch-22, because as a novice, you cannot possibly start learning binds with a sharp sword. But you will see in the videos that we try to simulate the behavior of sharp swords in binding situations, even with the blunt sword. So look out for that, you may find this interesting. What is also a disadvantage of wearing a mask and using blunt swords is that masks restrict vision. So when you're fencing with a mask and a blunt sword, you are working with a double handicap, because you see less and you work on even less information, because the pressure feedback is not as clear and precise as with sharp swords. So be aware of that. It's actually more difficult to apply historical technique with safe equipment than it would be using sharp swords. Personally, what I really enjoyed about these fights is that when people are wearing masks, they are not taking unnecessary risks, because that is the big challenge of a mask, and the temptation to do things that you would not without the protection of such a fencing mask. So don't let go of your danger awareness when using a mask, and I hope you're going to enjoy these fights and train hard and safely.